The first time my son, Daniel, came to me with his idea, I remember the sparkle in his eyes. He was only 24, fresh out of college, full of dreams that seemed impossible to the average man. "Dad," he said, laying down sketches and messy notes across the kitchen table, this is going to change lives, but I can't do it alone." I was 60 then, my hands rough from years of labor, my back aching from decades of work. I had already retired from my modest job in construction management, but when I looked at him, I didn't see just a son. I saw my legacy. I pushed aside my doubts and said the words that would seal my fate. "I'll help you, son. We'll build this together." The first few months were brutal. We worked out of my garage, the air filled with the scent of oil, sawdust, and hope. Daniel had the energy, the vision, but he lacked the discipline, the patience, and the grit that comes only with age and experience. That's where I stepped in. When we couldn't afford office rent, I convinced a friend to lend us space at half the price. When Daniel struggled with convincing suppliers, I sat with them, poured tea, and spoke from my years of negotiation. When money ran low, I cracked open my retirement savings, every last penny, believing in my boy. I even sold my old truck, the one I loved, just to cover the first batch of materials. My neighbors whispered that I was foolish, that I was throwing away a lifetime of security for a dream too big for reality. But I silenced them with faith, because a father believes. Years passed, and the dream began to take shape. The garage expanded into an office, the office into a building, and the building into a company buzzing with dozens of employees. We called it Bright Tech Solutions, Daniel's name, his dream, his vision. He became the face of the company, standing on stages, giving speeches, shaking hands with investors. People clapped for him, admired him, called him a young genius. Few remembered the old man in the background, the one carrying boxes late into the night, handling the books, calling in favors, and putting out fires. And I didn't mind, not once. Every time I saw Daniel on stage, every time I watched the company logo being broadcast, my heart swelled. I would sit in the audience, quiet and invisible, smiling as the crowd cheered for my son. "That's my boy." I'd whisper to myself. Everything I gave up was worth it. I didn't need credit. I didn't need applause. All I wanted was to see him soar higher than I ever could. And as the revenue poured in, as Bright Tech climbed from thousands to millions, I thought naively that family bonds were stronger than money. I thought loyalty and love could never be sold. I was wrong. Success is a strange thing. At first, it feels like sunlight, warm, bright, full of promise. But if you're not careful, it can scorch everything it touches. As Bright Tech grew, so did Daniel's ego. The boy who once asked for my advice at every turn now surrounded himself with investors, lawyers, and advisors, who whispered in his ear that he was the genius, the visionary, the empire builder. I noticed the change slowly at first. The late night talks we used to have about strategy became fewer. My ideas, once welcomed, began to receive polite nods, then dismissive glances, and eventually silence. "Dad, times are changing," he told me one evening after a board meeting. "We need fresh perspectives, modern ones." I chuckled softly. "Son, wisdom doesn't age, it deepens. You do well to remember that." He smiled faintly, but his eyes were already elsewhere. It wasn't long before the board began questioning my presence. I wasn't a shareholder. Every penny I'd given had been in trust, not in contract. Papers and signatures had never crossed my mind. After all, why would I need them? He was my son. But to the men in suits, I was just an old man without a title. "Mr. Harrison," one investor said bluntly, "perhaps it's time you step aside. Bright Tech has outgrown its humble beginnings." I swallowed my pride. I built this company with him. I reminded them, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. They exchanged smirks, the kind of look that says sentiment doesn't belong in business. The final blow came on a gray Monday morning. Daniel called me into the conference room, polished wood, leather chairs, a table longer than my dining room. The entire board was there. He cleared his throat. "Dad, this isn't easy for me, but the board and I have agreed it's time for you to retire." I stared at him, certain I had misheard. "Retire, Daniel? I never even took a salary. I'm not here for money. I'm here for you, for the company." His jaw tightened. "You've done enough, but your methods are outdated. Investors are losing confidence. We need a new direction. Please understand." The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. My chest felt heavy, as though someone had pressed a stone against my heart. "So this is it," I whispered. "After everything, after my savings, my time, my health, you throw me out like a stranger." His eyes flickered with something, guilt maybe, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "It's for the good of the company." I stood slowly, my hands trembling. Around the table, the suits watched with cold detachment. To them, it was just business. To me, it was betrayal deeper than any knife could cut. As I walked out, the secretary avoided my eyes. The young employees, people I had mentored, pretended to be busy at their desks. My footsteps echoed down the polished hallway like a funeral march. When I reached the lobby, I turned back one last time, staring at the glowing Bright Tech logo on the wall. Once it had been a symbol of our shared dream. Now it was the monument of my son's betrayal. And in that moment, something inside me broke. But something else was born too, quiet, steady, and burning like fire. A seed of revenge. The days after my dismissal felt like walking through fog. For the first time in years, I woke up without a purpose. No phone calls from suppliers, no meetings, no late night strategies with Daniel. The silence of my house was deafening. I would sit at the kitchen table, staring at the empty seat across from me, remembering the mornings Daniel and I used to plan the future over coffee. Now he planned it without me. News of my firing spread quickly. In our town, people whispered in grocery aisles, shook their heads at the cafe. "That's the old man who got kicked out of his own son's company. Imagine raising a boy only for him to toss you aside." The pity in their eyes cut deeper than their words. I wanted to scream that I wasn't weak, that I wasn't finished. But every time I opened my mouth, grief choked me. At night I would lie awake, my chest tight with betrayal. I thought of the sacrifices I had made, the money, the sleepless nights, the years of labor. All gone. And worst of all, I thought of Daniel's face, cold and indifferent as he told me I was no longer needed. It wasn't just a company he took from me. It was the bond between father and son. But grief has a strange way of transforming. The more I sat in my loneliness, the more anger began to stir beneath it. Anger at the men in suits who had treated me like dirt. Anger at Daniel, who had allowed greed to blind him, and anger at myself for trusting without protection, for giving without conditions. One night, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and stared at the old blueprints Daniel and I had once scribbled together. My hands shook, not with sorrow this time, but with resolve. "They think I'm finished," I muttered aloud. But they've underestimated the man who built the foundation. That night, a plan was born. I began reaching out quietly. Old friends from my construction days, suppliers who still respected me, young employees from Bright Tech who called me mentor, in hushed tones. Many of them were unhappy under Daniel's new leadership. They missed the days when honesty mattered more than image, when integrity wasn't sold for profit. "Mr. Harrison," one supplier told me, "the only reason we worked with Bright Tech was you. If you're starting something new, we'll follow." And they did. With their help, I began laying the groundwork for a new company, smaller, humbler, but built on trust and innovation. I didn't tell the world. I didn't announce it in newspapers or on stages. I worked in silence, the same way we had in that garage years ago. But this time, I wasn't doing it for Daniel. This time, I was doing it for myself. and perhaps, just perhaps, to show my son the price of betrayal. Each day, as the plan grew stronger, the pain in my chest eased. Grief gave way to determination, heartbreak turned into fire, and the whispers of pity around town began to sound different in my ears. Because one day soon, those same people who pitied me would tell a different story. That's the man who rose from betrayal and taught his son a lesson he'll never forget. It took 2 years for my new company to rise. 2 years of sleepless nights, hard work, and relentless determination. I named it True Core Innovations because, unlike Bright Tech, this company would be built on integrity, not arrogance. At first, people laughed, an old man starting over at 60. He'll never compete with Bright Tech. But they didn't see what I saw. They didn't know the fire that betrayal had lit inside me. Slowly, suppliers shifted their contracts to me. Old employees who still valued loyalty resigned from Bright Tech and joined my team. Investors tired of Daniel's ego-driven leadership started calling me quietly. The world loves a comeback story. Meanwhile, Daniel's empire began to show cracks. His hunger for expansion outpaced his judgment. He cut corners, pushed employees too hard, ignored customer complaints. The same arrogance that had led him to betray me now blinded him to reality. One morning, I read in the newspaper that Bright Tech was under investigation for failing to deliver on a major government contract. Investors were pulling out. Shares were plummeting. I felt no joy, only a strange, quiet sadness. A son should have listened to his father. Then came the day of reckoning. TrueCore was hosting its first major product launch. A clean, innovative design that solved the very problem Daniel had once pitched to me years ago. The hall was filled with reporters, investors, and former Bright Tech clients. I stood on stage, my hands steady, my voice strong, the logo of my company glowing behind me. As I spoke about integrity, trust, and the importance of building not just companies but communities, I noticed him, Daniel, sitting in the back, almost unrecognizable. His suit wrinkled, his eyes sunken, his pride shattered. For a moment my heart ached. This was my son. My flesh and blood, the boy whose dreams I had carried on my shoulders. But then I remembered the coldness in his eyes the day he fired me. The boardroom silence, the humiliation, and I spoke louder. Success means nothing if it is built on betrayal. True success is not measured in millions, but in the respect you earn and the trust you keep. The audience erupted in applause. Reporters scribbled furiously. Investors nodded, and Daniel lowered his head, unable to meet my eyes. Bright Tech collapsed within a year. TrueCore soared. People told the story differently now. The father who built 2 empires, one for his son and one for himself. The man who rose from betrayal to triumph. As for Daniel, he came to me one evening broken. He stood on my porch, his voice trembling. "Dad, I was wrong about everything. I thought money made me strong, but it only made me blind. Can you ever forgive me?" I looked at him for a long time, my heart heavy. Forgiveness is easy for small mistakes, but betrayal from your own blood, cuts the deepest. "I forgive you," I finally said, my voice steady. "But forgiveness doesn't erase the lesson. Remember this, Daniel. The empire you betrayed me for is gone. The one I built after will stand as a reminder of what you lost." Tears filled his eyes. He nodded, broken but wiser. I closed the door gently, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity, because sometimes love must teach through distance. And as I sat in my chair that night, looking at the glowing TrueCore sign across the street, I realized something. This was more than revenge. This was justice, and it was sweet.